And we reject the lies of the colonial bourgeois media that demonize our struggle. We reject the criminalization of our movements. We reject the attempts to isolate us from the Palestinian and indigenous sisters and brothers. And we say no to U.S. imperialism. We say no to colonialism, and we say no to Zionist occupation, and no to the genocide of indigenous people in the Americas. And we say yes to African self-determination. We say yes to Palestinian resistance, and we say yes to indigenous people and the rights of their land.
You're listening to Reparations in Action here on Black Power 96.3.
Reparations now!
Uhuru, you're listening to the Reparations in Action podcast and FM radio show. My name is Brendan McCoy, and today I am hosting Reparations in Action, which broadcasts weekly on Black Power 96.3 FM in St. Petersburg, Florida. Reparations in Action, also known as White Lies Shattered, is a program of white solidarity with Black power. We believe reparations to African people is the key question of our times and is one that demands action on the part of European or white people. As always, I want to start by saluting our leadership, Chairman Omala Yeshitela and the African People's Socialist Party, for leading the African Revolution and developing the theory of African internationalism and the understanding of the colonial mode of production. African internationalism is the theory and worldview of the African working class that guides the struggle for African liberation, and which we credit for all of the understandings and analysis provided on this podcast. I'd also like to salute Black Power 96, WBPU 96.3 FM in St. Petersburg, Florida, where this show is aired and recorded for our podcast. Black Power 96 is not just explaining the world, but changing it. You can get the app for Black Power 96 on Google Play or the Apple App Store and listen wherever you are located. Today, we're going to listen to some clips from this year's Uhuru Solidarity Movement's National Convention, which took place in St. Louis, Missouri, the heart of the Black Power Blueprint. We'll hear from the chairwoman of the African People's Solidarity Committee, Penny Hess, as well as Efia Nwangaza, who is a member of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, or SNCC, and a longtime veteran of the Black liberation struggle. Finally, we'll hear from Yejide Orunmila, president of the African National Women's Organization. These clips were taken from a panel discussing the history of the anti-colonial struggle. Here's Chairwoman Penny speaking on this panel.
First of all, I want to again, remind us of what the chairman was just saying, that we have the honor of being in the presence of greats, of giants, of the national liberation movement right here, and that chairman has fought for the liberation of African people for his entire life, and who has, as we were saying before, who has solved the problems of the revolution. The chairman summed up why was the African liberation movement defeated in the 1960s? When revolutions were being won. As the chairman said, the main trend, revolution was the main trend in the world at that time, when there was revolution in Vietnam, and certainly all throughout Africa and Angola and Mozambique and throughout South America, and certainly of the African Revolution inside the US. And the thing that I just wanted to say a couple of things, because that revolution is not over. And it didn't end because people were happy about what happened. But we are with Chairman Omala Yeshitela, Efia Nwangaza, who were both in the period of the 60s, who fought like hell, who were leaders in this time. Efia in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. Chairman also was in the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee. That was the main organization that, as they say, if this is correct, that it kind of bridged the gap between the civil rights movement and the Black Power movement. And as Stokely Carmichael became one of the people for Efia's going to talk about this. So I wanted to say a couple of things, and it's a little bit on this. First of all, I wanted to salute Comrade Kara, by the way. I don't know if Kara's still here, but yes, there she is. Kara, I wanted to salute you because I was thinking back about how long that you've been in the movement. And I do remember before there was an iPhone, before that was a thing, you would use your phone. It might have been a flip phone. I don't know what you were doing. And you had earphones on to your phone. And I was like, well, what are you listening to? And you said, oh, I'm listening to a speech by Chairman Omali Shatella. And I was like, is that a thing? I didn't even know you could listen to your phone. And you were there listening to the phone. I just wanted to say, listening to the chairman's speeches on the phone. So that was very, very, very impressive. And I wanted to also say, I don't know, is Comrade Redbeard still in the room? There you are, Comrade. Do you remember when we were in San Francisco, the chairman was in San Francisco, and the struggle for the liberation of Nicaragua was going on. The Sandinistas were very close. The Sandinistas that were assigned to San Francisco, because there were a lot of Nicaraguan exiles in San Francisco at that time. And I remember there was Mario, Dennis, and Carmen. And they spoke at every event that we had in that period. We had many events at the Women's Building. Also, we talked about Nancy M. Is Nancy the one whose parents spoke at the Uhuru movement?
That was Mona.
Oh, that was Mona. Okay, Mona. That was another comrade who was part of Hands Off Uhuru, whose parents, she is from Egypt, I think it is, but she was speaking about, in Hands Off Uhuru, she played a role of speaking about the Palestinian struggle, and we found out that her parents spoke at an event not at the Uhuru House, but at the Women's Building in San Francisco. That was an Uhuru movement event way back in that period. So, you know, there's so much history there. But I remember the period when the Sandinistas were in San Francisco. We knew them. We worked. The party worked with them, and they had demonstrations every Saturday in the Mission area of San Francisco.
And they had a cultural center called Casa Nicaragua.
That's right, Casa Nicaragua. Casa Nicaragua. They showed raw footage of the struggle that was taking place in Nicaragua. It was so immediate. But the thing that really strikes, that I wanted to raise that was one of the things that they really talked about in practice was the struggle for dual and contending power. And how it worked was they could take a town or a whole area, region, and it became liberated territory, and then the colonial state could not come into there because the people would come out, and they had to fight that, and it became, they would take the liberated territories and they would become larger and larger and larger. And that was such a powerful, inspiring presentation, Deputy Chair, and this work. And, we've seen how, the state, like here is this neighborhood, this area of North St. Louis is designated even by the city as a food desert or a food apartheid. There's no food here. There's no grocery stores, no restaurants. And so the city attacks the Uhuru movement for opening a bakery in a food desert. And that's clear that because they are fighting not a bakery, they're fighting dual and contending power and liberated territory of the Uhuru movement, of the African working class on the north side of St. Louis. And that's why it was a powerful, powerful fight back and victory that was won in this struggle for led by the office of deputy chair. It was very powerful. So, yeah, I wanted to say that, and also that this kind of work on the ground is, it's going to continue. This is, anyway, there's going to be a lot more that we're going to be talking about. And I do want to make a call, and I will again tomorrow. I do want to make a call for any of the comrades who are here today or online to move here. Move here. This is where dual contending power is happening. Move to liberated territory. We need you here. We need people to be on the ground, organizing, raising resources, and doing physical work that is being called for by the party. So I'm really serious about that. I'm really serious about that. Come here to St. Louis. And I also wanted to say that the chairman said to say this. The chairman said when he was speaking, he said, quote, that African people were enslaved and were property. And he goes, therefore, I was possessed. He says, I was possessed. But it reminded me, it just brought to mind, because sometimes the chairman in the past has likened, this colonial white population as something to the sci-fi movie, The Invasion of the Body Snatchers. And if anybody has seen that, if you haven't seen it, you have to see it. But where these pods happen, and these people-like characters come out of the pods, but they're really just, this white population. they're robots, etc. And I just think that that's a good thing. And some people also, by the way, think that film is about the MK Ultra program, which is a real thing. Even though there is a really good book about that called The Poisoner in Chief, and I really urge people to read that because it documents the MK Ultra and all of the things that they attempted to do to the African Revolution and to revolutionary movements around the world as part of the counterinsurgency. So, yeah, I just really wanted to salute, Comrade Redbeard, who has been out there for so long from the Desi Woods movement. There was a picture there of the Free Desi Woods demonstration in downtown San Francisco in those days of the 1970s and early 80s. I also wanted to be able to address what the chairman has called the opportunism of the white population. The ability, because we sit on the pedestal of the oppression of African people, we see ourselves. We see ourselves in the center. We put ourselves in the center. And, this alienation of white people from the rest of the planet Earth is something that enables, that this relationship under the leadership of the African People's Socialist Party enables us, for the first time in history, as white people, to have a principled relationship to African people and the people on the planet Earth. Because otherwise it's white people going into, trying to have a relationship to African people based on the same relations of colonialism and the power structure that exists there. And white people are the colonizers, and that is very clear. So this is very, very powerful. I also wanted to, we were talking about before, the chairman introduced the question of reparations and made it a household word. Yes. In 82, when the party held the first tribunal on reparations to African people in Brooklyn, New York. And I think I talked about that a little bit before, but the chairman, a lot of people, we would be out there from the Solidarity Movement with the banners, reparations to African people, and people who were sort of watching any kind of demonstration we had would be like, well, what is reparations? What does that even mean? And we would explain it. And now it is a household word. It is. And there is no place, the chairman made it that. That was his goal. Reparations would be a household word, he said. And he made it that. He made it that through making and summing up the demand of reparations as what is owed to African people based on a parasitic economy that has stolen the labor, the freedom, the genius, the land, the resources of Africa and African people and indigenous people and the peoples on the planet Earth. So every little town now, because I get a Google notice of reparations in my email, and every little town, everywhere, there is a reparations commission, and people are organizing for reparations in corporations, in all of this. And it's not saying that these are revolutionary, but it is something unleashed that will not go back in the bottle, because it is there. And whether some of it is opportunist or just to get some money, as far as I'm concerned, fine. Because the fact is that the demand is out there, but we have to understand that it came from Chairman Omali Shatella, and it was a revolutionary demand. So I wanted to say that, and that, again, that the chairman has fought for the understanding, and this is so critical, that the struggle of African people is not against racism. It is not against the ideas in white people's heads, because that calls for African assimilation into the status quo of the colonial mode of production. And that really makes so much sense to me. It's about colonialism, and it's not something that you could use racism and colonialism to be interchangeable, because colonialism is defined by the domination of an entire people by another, as the party says, a foreign and alien population for profit with violence. That's what colonialism is. And as the chairman said, that makes you have the conclusion that the struggle of African people is for power. It is for power. But if you're talking about racism, then you're saying the struggle of African people is to make, as the chairman says, make white people like them. And that's absurd. And the chairman has said that it is the goal of the party for African people to have the power to keep any white person or government with racist ideas in their heads from hurting African people ever again. And African people would have power, state power, to govern themselves. And I just feel that, to me, that is what recruited me. The chairman recruited me based on this makes so much sense. This makes so much sense. And white people can get behind this as well and be part of it and carry out what it is that we have to do, because the Solidarity movement was created as the front of the party behind enemy lines. And that's where we live. We live behind enemy. We live in the enemy lines in terms of colonialism. And we are about changing that, turning that over, and winning more and more white people to abandon that place on the pedestal and to jump off that and join the people on the planet Earth, get rid of anxiety and all the things that, that white people have, the fears, the anxiety, the whatever, the need to take meds for this and that. And what we need is solidarity, is being under the leadership of the African Revolution And we know that this is how we are part of the world. This is our liberation, our redemption to be part of that. And the chairman has introduced that to the world and the colonial question. And you don't see I think the chairman was saying this. If you look at different things and websites and books that are coming out, you don't see people writing a lot about racism now. They're writing about colonialism. There are books about colonialism, and this is due to the chairman. So I don't know what my time is, or my time is up, but.
We have 7.
Pardon me?
7.
I have 7 more minutes? Okay, well, let me just say a few more things then. I know the chairman a lot when he talks about, sort of the ultimate of white religion is the Catholic religion. And I would just say I was raised a Catholic. I went to Catholic school from kindergarten through the first 2 years of university, where I went to Jesuit. And I despised that. I had to do that because of my parents. I still lived with my parents for those years, but I despised the Catholic Church. I just thought it was inhuman. And so I did, as part of the movement, I did research it. And I do know that the Catholic Church played a huge role, probably a leading role, one of the most leading roles in the whole division of the world into colonial, under different colonial powers. And that the Catholic Church in particular played a huge role in the actual genocide of the indigenous people. So there are places throughout the country and in California in particular where they call it Mission Dolores, and all up and down the coast. These were Catholic, and there's one in LA, San Diego, all the way. They started out as Jesuit missions in which they used enslaved indigenous people. And we know, first of all, what the whole rape, the rape of children, all of them. This is all part of colonialism. This is what the Catholic Church represents. It represents the greatest wealth of colonial plunder, and it represents, rape and terror of indigenous and African children, and genocide, active genocide in murdering and working to death indigenous people, and a huge role in the what's called the trade, the slave trade, the trade in human beings. So this is the Catholic Church. So I just wanted to say that as well. And one other thing that I wanted to bring out that the chairman has taught us is that he's always said that Jews were Germans when Europe was slaughtering African people.
When Germany was.
Who did I say was? Oh,
Germany, yeah.
Yeah, when Germany was. I'm sorry. When Germany was slaughtering African people throughout the continent of Africa, in Namibia, in Kenya, and all of this, millions of African people, and that, they always have that thing about, well, they'll come for me in the morning, and in fact, like the chairman said, they already came for African people.
Right.
And so then they raised what happened when white people killed other white people in Europe, in Germany, that the Zionists and the Jews raised this, and the U.S. government to the greatest Holocaust ever.
Right.
When in fact, we don't, like 20 million people in Congo murdered. How many in Kenya and Tanzania, South Africa, and many, many, many other places throughout the continent of Africa. So that is another thing that we have to understand, that the answer, the future, is in the liberation of African people, and when Africa is free, when African people everywhere are free, the world will be free, because the colonial wealth that is extracted from Africa today is immense. And so there's no way, as we were saying, that we could walk over African people to support Palestine. We support Palestine by supporting the African liberation movement that has a relationship that is part of the struggle of the people of Palestine for national liberation. So we have to, this is about winning and creating and fighting for a principled relationship to African people under the leadership of the African liberation movement, fighting for reparations, getting the resources, turning it back over, so this dual power that is being built by the Uhuru movement, this liberated territory, can continue to build and go forward in a powerful way. And we have the honor of being part of that. So I just wanted to say Uhuru, and we are winning. I'm proud to be on the winning side.
You're listening to Reparations in Action. That was Chairwoman Penny at this year's Uhuru Solidarity Movement's National Convention, talking about the history of the anti-colonial struggle. We were honored to have veteran of the Black Liberation Movement, Efia Nwangaza, at this year's convention. Here she is, speaking on the same topic.
Uhuru. I am, first of all, let me salute Comrade Orunmila Yesatawa, Deputy Chair, Onezene Yesatawa, and all of you for the work that you do and the presence that you maintain in the universe. I believe very strongly in what's called the butterfly effect. And that when the butterfly flaps its wings, that energy emanates around the planet and throughout the universe. And the fact that Chairman Orunmila Yesatawa could survive and thrive despite the assault on the African Revolution, both here and abroad, kept that energy present in the universe and created an opportunity for all of us to survive and thrive in the ways that we would otherwise have been deficient.
Yes.
Penny mentioned that, in fact, I was reminding her of when I first met her. In fact, I met the movement through Penny's book, which was the result of someone tabling from the movement at an Cobra event in Atlanta. And it was working back from that book that I became aware of the Uhuru movement and actually of Chairman Orunmila Yesatawa. SNCC, our nexus, was the fulcrum taking up the challenge of Malcolm X.
Yes.
To move the U.S. freedom movement, commonly called the Civil Rights Movement, to a human rights movement committed to self-determination as coined in the phrase Black Power. It was the members of the Atlanta Project, which ran a gamut of activists, organizers, students, seasoned and newly initiated, who had experienced or observed and all analyzed the struggle, the modern struggle that had actually began in the 40s. We have a tendency to think that the movement began in the 60s, but it's been going on for about 600 years now, but the modern phase of it. Recognize the effort as represented by A. Philip Randolph and the labor movement, the desegregation of the U.S. military, which was a betrayal of ancestors before, and even of indigenous people. An indigenous college professor was recently annoyed by me when I pointed out she was bragging about the code talkers. And I talked about the African buffalo soldiers, both of which were suffering from Stockholm syndrome. It was those of us who had already been involved in the Freedom Summer movement in Mississippi, Southwest Georgia, you've heard the stories, who had gone to Atlantic City to challenge the Democrat Party to seat the integrated delegation from Mississippi, only to be turned away and urged to compromise by taking 2 seats in an at-large section. When Mrs. Hamer said, all of us is tired, not just just 2 of us, and refused, was not flattered by that proposal. Indeed, was insulted and refused to take those 2 seats.
Yeah.
People came back from Atlantic City wondering what to do, what's next? What do we do next? What can we do next? So the Voting Rights Act passed. We just had the 60th anniversary in Selma with everybody showing up to get their pictures taken on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. But the people on the Atlanta Project said, we just got Julian Bond elected. And because he was the communications secretary for SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, and SNCC, before SCLC or NAACP came out in opposition to the U.S. war on Vietnam, having signed on to a deal to not criticize the U.S. government when it was at war, rightfully or not. SNCC broke that rule and said, no, it's wrong. And not only is it wrong, but we're not even going to go, and we're going to tell other people don't go. My father was a certified counselor trained by the American Friends Service Committee to help young men to get conscientious objector status so that they would not have to go. And while that was a step, it wasn't the step, because there are other ways to support violence against folk colonialism and exploitation than carrying a gun. So even as a conscientious objector, if you were willing to be a medic, you just as well as had a gun. However, it set the tone for myself and my brothers and sisters to understand that participation in imperialist wars was not okay. Right. So the Atlanta Project prodded SNCC into taking that position, and having taken that position, and Julian as communications secretary announcing that position, was denied his seat in the Georgia legislature. He was the first Black person to be elected to the Georgia legislature since Reconstruction. Mm-hmm. But they said, that don't matter to us. If you come out against our interests, we will not allow you to enjoy the privileges of our interests. So they refused to seat him. And the Atlanta Project was created to run the second campaign, the special election for Julian Bond, right. In order for him to run again, win his seat, both in the streets and in the courts. Right. But we were saying, it doesn't empower Black people to have power over our lives, as the chairman often characterizes it. What we need is power. Yes. Black power. Yes. Richard Wright, a communist activist back in the 1920s, had written a book called Black Power. The year before we made the call with our position paper, Adam Clayton Powell gave a formal address at Howard University Law School saying what we need is Black power. He said, you have the power in your hands. And of course, what he meant was the ballot. But the people on the Atlanta Project, we knew that the limitations of electoral politics was such that we didn't have the power in our hands as represented by the ballot. Because Julian had gotten elected and they didn't even have to seat him if they didn't want to, without a great deal of difficulty. And then once they seated him, he was in a minority like the rest of us around the country, that you could be present but not be counted. So the question remains, where do we go from here and what do we do next? In New Orleans, we began looking at the film, The Battle of Algiers. Yeah. Reading Fanon, Wretched of the Earth. Yes. Black Skin, White Mask. Yeah. To try and answer that question, with which Martin Luther King was also grappling. Wrote a book, Where Do We Go From Here? But he didn't get to the challenge that Malcolm raised. Yeah. That where we go is to the global human rights struggle. Even though King had been present at the independence celebration for Ghana, celebrated other African countries and their flag independence because they remain economically and militarily under the control, as today, of the colonizer. So what we said is, white folks need to go home and organize their mama, their daddy, their sister, their brother, their cousin. Stop hiding in the Black community. Yeah. Right. Go and challenge the source of the problem. And Black folks stop succumbing, surrendering, tolerating the brainwashing and the crumbs that we were given to be complicit in our oppression. That meant that we had to stand up on our own 2 feet. And that meant that there were some of us who would even have to pick up the gun, go to jail, forego that bright, shiny bauble, whether it was a PhD, an MA, a BA, even a high school diploma, a house with a twin-car garage or a color TV, to be free. We had to make some decisions about what, in fact, is important in the life of humanity, including our own. Understanding that we were in an environment, an ongoing criminal enterprise built with stolen labor on stolen land. And that in order to survive in that environment righteously, we had to dismantle, to challenge that criminal system, to not allow it to not only define us, but to define anyone or anything else and to challenge it. Recently, I've been working with the young people out of Atlanta in the Stop Cop City project. And I began working with them out of frustration, quite frankly, because we were hearing so much about Atlanta and they were still talking about Atlanta, but like mushrooms popping up all around across this country, over 100 cop cities were emerging in various forms. And I said to myself, don't they understand that it's not just a cop city, but a cop nation? That it is a global phenomenon that has to be challenged? So I wrote them an open letter. The proposed Atlanta Cop City Uber militarization training base and headquarters is a reincarnation of antebellum South Carolina Citadel, founded in 1842. The Citadel traces its origins to an arsenal constructed by the state of South Carolina to defend white Charlestonians against possible slave uprisings following Denmark Vesey's thwarted rebellion of 1822. It was preceded by the Stono Rebellion and the Haitian Rebellion. And even before that, in 1811, the New Orleans Rebellion. Even Thomas Jefferson was mindful of the roots of resistance and the need of human beings to be free. Penny mentioned the new books, not on racism, not even on white supremacy. Born in Blackness, written by Howard French, a former New York Times publisher, who goes back to 1400s and before the papal bull of the Catholic Church. And talks about and documents the observation that the chairman often makes and that Penny mentioned of standing on the pedestal. His premise is that modern human history is based on standing on the pedestal of African oppression. So today, I am moved. I'm always moved when I'm with you all. I am informed, instructed, and inspired because you have survived. You have kept the spirit of revolution alive. And in a timely fashion, the moment has come again where it will flourish.
Uhuru, that was Efia Nwangaza, revolutionary and veteran of the Black Liberation Movement, speaking at this year's Uhuru Solidarity Movement National Convention. Finally, we have Yejide Orunmila, president of the African National Women's Organization.
Oh man, this has been an incredible panel, and I just appreciate Comrades Penny and Comrade Efia and Comrade Chairman for what has been said before me. And I just appreciate the Uhuru Solidarity Movement also for making the struggle under the leadership of the African working class to, bring reparations into this revolutionary struggle and to really win it inside the white community. So Uhuru, and a great convention so far. So comrades, I have been asked to talk about the women's struggle and the anti-colonial perspective. And I just want to say that today we're gathered here at a critical moment in history. This is a moment that's shaped by relentless struggle of oppressed peoples to break free from the shackles of colonial domination. And the forces of imperialism and settler colonialism have waged war against African, indigenous, and Palestinian people for centuries, yet our history shows one of undeniable truth. It is the anti-colonial struggle that moves history forward. It is our resistance, our demand for self-determination, and our unwavering fight for justice that have shaped the entire world. As African women, we stand at the forefront of this struggle. We are not passive victims of colonialism, but active participants in the liberation of our people. The African National Women's Organization, ANWO, was founded on the principle that African women must organize to destroy parasitic capitalism and destroy a parasitic system that thrives on our oppression. We understand that our liberation is tied to the liberation of our entire people. There is no African freedom without African women. There is no revolution without the total destruction of the colonial capitalist system. And we recognize that a woman's place is in the struggle, whether it be an African woman fighting for African liberation, white women who are in the reparations movement to support African liberation. This slogan is not just a slogan. It's a truth proven by history. Too often we are told that our role is in the background, supporting but not leading, nurturing but not fighting. But the reality is that African women have always been warriors, strategists, and revolutionaries. We have carried the burden of resistance on our backs while raising children, building communities, and protecting the people. The world does not move without the labor and strength and resilience of African women. So our fight is not just about colonialism as a broad system, but also against the internalized oppression that seeks to silence us within our own movements. And we reject the idea that liberation of African women is secondary to the liberation of our people as a whole. And these struggles are not separate, they are one. We will not be free until the chains of colonial violence are broken. The fight for African women's liberation is not in addition to making the African Revolution. It is essential as a front in the struggle against colonialism itself. So we are not fooled also by the rise of the African petty bourgeoisie to places of perceived power either. We know that African men and women are part of the colonial strategy to maintain power. We must struggle and win the position that Black women in particular make our highest achievements through our struggle for liberation. And we recognize that colonialism is the root of our oppression. It is the greatest crime against humanity. It is our stolen land, our labor, our culture, and our very humanity. It is the reason why African people are scattered across the world, suffering under the weight of poverty, state violence, and political oppression. It's the same system that enslaved our ancestors, that robbed the indigenous people of their land, that wages a genocidal war against Palestine, is the same system we are fighting right now, today. It is the same enemy, whether it's in the police forces that occupy our community, the Israeli bombs that massacre Palestinians, or the colonial project of the U.S. that exploits the labor and lands of the indigenous people. Our history is just not one of oppression, though. It is a history of struggle. It is the Haitian Revolution that defeated the armies of France, Spain, and Britain to establish the first free Black republic. It is the Mau Mau in Kenya, the liberation movements in Algeria, Zimbabwe, Guinea-Bissau, and Angola. It is the Black Panther Party in the U.S. and the African People's Socialist Party that has waged a relentless struggle against colonialism. And as African women, we struggle for liberation. We have always been at the center of the anti-colonial struggle, from examples like Ya Santawa, who is a Ashanti, who resisted as a part of the Ashanti people, to Harriet Tubman, who led our people to freedom in the U.S., from Queen Nzinga fighting Portuguese colonizers to the revolutionary leadership of Assata Shakur. Our history is filled with women, those women and more, who have refused to submit to oppression. And today, African women continue to be on the front lines, and are, whether they're Black mothers from Ferguson who led uprisings against police terror, or in South Africa where African women organize every day to survive and improve their conditions, considering that they're still living under settler colonialism. In Palestine, we see the strength of women standing in the face of the Israeli occupation. In indigenous communities, women are leading the fight against environmental destruction and land theft. And these struggles are connected because colonialism is a global system, and it must be destroyed globally. Mm-hmm. Our struggle is a struggle for power. Just like the chairman said, we're not here asking anybody for anything. We are here making and creating a new world through the process of making the African Revolution right now, creating liberated territory, and we are preparing ourselves to govern. So we're not begging for justice, we're seizing it. And the path to victory is through organization and through revolutionary action. ANWO calls on African women to reject colonial or bourgeois feminism, which seeks to integrate us into the same oppressive system, and instead embrace revolutionary African womanhood, which demands total liberation for our people. And we reject the lies of the colonial bourgeois media that demonize our struggle. We reject the criminalization of our movements. We reject the attempts to isolate us from the Palestinian and indigenous sisters and brothers. And we say no to U.S. imperialism. We say no to colonialism, and we say no to Zionist occupation, and no to the genocide of indigenous people in the Americas. And we say yes to African self-determination. We say yes to Palestinian resistance, and we say yes to indigenous people and the rights of their land. And the road to liberation is painted in Black for us. Socialism is painted in Black, right? We know that in order to create true socialism in the world, African people must have ownership and control of the means of our production, and we have to have a united Africa that's led by the African working class. Therefore, the path to real socialism is painted in Black. And the history teaches us that no system of oppression lasts forever. So we're dealing with this crisis of imperialism right now. We're recognizing and we're seeing it crumble in front of our faces, and we're seeing the victory of the masses of people who are fighting against imperialism winning and chipping away at it. So we know that it will fall. And I feel like it's going to fall in our lifetime. The colonial rulers may have guns, prisons, and armies, but they do not have the people. The masses of the world have stood up, and they stood on the side of liberation. It is our responsibility to continue to hold our movement, to raise our voices, to educate and organize, and to struggle until the very last chains of colonialism are shattered. And the time is now. Right. That's why we're here at the USM convention. That's why we've been organizing in the streets all this time, because victory is inevitable. Because history is on our side. When we see the downfall of colonialism, we will see it in our lifetime. We will see the liberation of our lands in our lifetime. We will see the future of African, indigenous, and Palestinian children live free from occupation, poverty, and terror in our lifetime. And let us continue to resist. Let us continue to organize. Let us continue to struggle against until victory is ours. Uhuru, and long live the anti-colonial struggle. Long live African women's resistance, and long live the unity of oppressed peoples against colonialism. Uhuru.
That was Yejide Orunmila, president of the African National Women's Organization. You can catch the rest of the convention on the Uhuru Solidarity Movement's YouTube page. My name is Brendan McCoy, and I want to thank you for listening to another episode of Reparations in Action. Uhuru!
This has been an episode of Reparations in Action, a biased podcast of white solidarity with Black power. My name is Jamie Simpson. We'd like to thank our team of volunteers. Our sound engineer is Aaron Loss, who also composes our theme music. Our research coordinator is Alex Pletcher. Reparations in Action is produced by Penny Hess, Jesse Neville, and Lisa Watson from the Black Power 96 studio in St. Petersburg, Florida. A shout out to Burning Spear Media Director Akile Anayi, as well as Black Power 96, WBPU LP St. Petersburg, and the station manager, Mr. Eddie Maltzby. If you like what you've heard today, you can go to Apple Podcasts and rate this podcast. If you have questions, comments, suggestions, or if you would like to join our volunteer team, you can email us at ria@blackpower96.org. That's ria@blackpower96.org. A special thanks to Chairman Omali Eshatella and the African People's Socialist Party, without whose relentless leadership and theory of African internationalism, none of the understandings presented on Reparations in Action would be possible.